In October 2024, we gathered at the PASI Legislative Summit to tackle a profound and troubling question. Why do our judicial systems seemingly disregard the Constitution, leading to the fracturing of families? The issue of parental alienation has evolved into a silent epidemic, often manipulating as a powerful weapon during divorce disputes. This manipulation not only harms the relationships between parents and their children, but also inflicts emotional and psychological turmoil on the children themselves. As policymakers engage in lengthy discussions about shared parenting arrangements, child support formulas, and custody regulations, the true victims, our children, are often left on the sidelines. They face the emotional fallout of these contentious debates while their lives are dissected as if they were mere bargaining chips in legal negotiations. It is imperative that we come together as a community to advocate for the meaningful change in our family courts. We must unite to ensure that the voices of children are prioritized, fostering environments where they can thrive rather than endure the negative ramifications of adult conflicts. Their well-being should always take precedence, driving us to demand legal reforms that uphold their rights, dignity, and emotional health. Only by standing together can we hope to create a future where children are shielded from unnecessary strife and their best interests at the forefront of every decision made.
Yeah, there he is. Okay, let me just introduce Dr. Bernet, William Bernet, and MD and Professor Emeritus at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine, has testified as an expert in forensic psychiatry 300 times in 24 states. In 2007, Dr. Bernet and Judge Don R. Ash published Children of Divorce, a practical guide for parents, therapists, attorneys, and judges. Dr. Bernet edited Parental Alienation DSM-5 and ICD-11 in 2010. He and colleagues edited Parental Alienation, the Handbook for Mental Health and Legal Professionals in 2013. Dr. Bernet and Demosthenes Lorandos edited Parental Alienation, Science and the Law in 2020. He is the founder and first president of the Parental Alienation Study Group. Bill, thank you for everything that you've done for parental alienation, and welcome. We look forward to your presentation.
Hi, Larry. Thank you for those remarks. So first of all, we're going to have a little technology check. And the first step of that is to see if I can share my screen. Okay. So thank you for inviting me to be here today at the Parental Alienation Consortium Legislative Summit, which is a historic event. So here's my topic: misinformation echo chamber, false statements about parental alienation theory. And so my first step is to see whether I can change this. Oh, there we go. So here I am. So I'm Bill Bernet. I'm a child psychiatrist and a forensic psychiatrist in Nashville, Tennessee. So I want to try to explain how my topic fits in to your agenda for this weekend. And I want to kind of just give you an overview of what, in fact, is the scope of parental alienation theory and practice. The scope includes a number of different topics, such as the history of the topic, the identification of parental alienation, the prevention, interventions. I have here causation and prevalence, so that has to do with research. All these things have to do with parental alienation theory and practice. And now we're getting into what you all are doing this weekend: legal issues regarding alienation, education of legal professionals, and advocacy with legislatures and government agencies. So today I'm going to add one more thing to this list of the scope of PA theory, which is counteracting misinformation regarding parental alienation. How do these things fit together? I think they fit together in this take-home message that I hope you will hear and, in fact, take home with you. that in order to promote legislation regarding parental alienation and shared custody, it's necessary to understand the components of PA theory, which is what I've just gone down that list, and also to recognize and counteract misinformation regarding parental alienation. In other words, what you're doing, legislation and lobbying, does not exist in a vacuum. It is surrounded by all the different components of what constitutes parental alienation theory, and it's also surrounded by an enormous amount of information that you need to know something about in order to even have a conversation with the people that you're trying to influence. So today I'm going to go over some recurrent misstatements, some common misstatements about alienation, some recent research that I've been involved with, which I think it raises the whole new way of thinking about misinformation and what to do about it, some strategies for addressing misinformation. So what are some recurrent misstatements? So these are the things that, I've been reading this for years. These are the things that come up over and over and over again. And I'm sure everybody listening has heard these before, that Richard Gardner endorsed pedophilia. That is untrue. That parental alienation is not recognized by any professional organization in the United States. That is untrue. And that alienation is not admissible in courts in the United States. So that's not true either, even though these are probably the three most common statements that are made that are false about parental alienation. So by the way, Larry DeMarco just explained how AI is going to change the way we think and change the way we put ideas together. And AI is having an enormous effect on misinformation. Almost everybody who writes about this says that the AI revolution is going to also create a revolution in misinformation, because it is going to be so easy for the people who want to say something that's untrue to fabricate statements, to fabricate quotations that are made up, to fabricate videos. So got to watch out. AI is a tremendous benefit to mankind, but it's also going to be a tremendous boost for the people who are interested or who create misinformation. So here are some common examples. I think you're familiar with the idea of ad hominem attacks. For instance, I mentioned this a minute ago, that parental alienation theories was launched by child psychiatrist Richard Gardner, who was an adherent of pedophilia. So that was published in a book, published in Sweden, a famous book, and also it was stated in a peer-reviewed journal article in the Journal of Child Custody that Gardner favored pedophilia. Here's another one. This was in a psychiatric newspaper a few years ago. This was back when we were working on the DSM-5, and the statement said, fathers' rights groups who don't like to be interfered with when they are sexually abusing their children petition the DSM-5 task force to include PAS and DSM-5. Who are they talking about there? They're talking about me. I'm the guy who petitioned for parental alienation to be included in DSM-5. And they're saying that I'm a kind of person who I don't want to be interfered when I'm abusing my children. So many people wrote letters into this psychiatric newspaper. And in the very next issue, the author of that piece of misinformation retracted it and said that he agrees that parental alienation is real and that it damages children. So that's just a really quick example that sometimes when misinformation occurs, you can undo it. Here's another classic kind of ad hominem attack that occurred in a forensic psychiatry journal. And that says that the reason that we are interested in parental alienation is the financial motivation. To get a good sense of PAS support, one only has to follow the money trail. So that's a pretty insulting statement. So that was published in the journal that I subscribe to, and I belong to this organization. the Journal of the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law. And it was an article here, the parental alienation debate belongs in the courtroom. And this is actually by somebody I know, Timothy Hochin and his colleagues wrote this article. And in this case, we responded to it by having a new article by myself and by Amy Baker, in which we contradicted the original article. So those two articles were not published back to back, but they were published in one issue and then in a subsequent issue of the same journal. So here's another kind of common misinformation. I call this quotations that misquote. So here's a quotation that was attributed to me and my colleagues, and which is totally wrong. So the quotation says, parental alienation syndrome assumes that a child's strong alignment with one parent while rejecting a relationship with the other parent is without legitimate justification, including situations in which there is child abuse. So both of those red sections are wrong. We don't assume that at all, and we certainly don't assume it in situations where there is child abuse. But the citation is an article that I published and my colleagues in some years ago in 2010. Where did this show up? This misquotation showed up in a book published by the American Psychological Association. So this is the name of the book. We complained to the APA, and it reached the highest level of the APA, including the General Counsel of the American Psychological Association, and they, in fact, corrected that paragraph. So that's another example that sometimes misinformation can be corrected. Here's another example where a journal is misquoting an important article by Michael Saini. Actually, this is a book chapter in which the misquote says that methods of operationalizing PA differ among proponents to such an extent that the body of literature on the phenomenon cannot be reliably synthesized to assess its overall validity. So they're quoting Michael Saini, and that's not what he said at all. This is what he actually said. This is a famous quote from Saini's book chapter on empirical studies of alienation, in which he said the opposite. There's a remarkable agreement about the behavioral strategies that parents can use. So there's agreement about alienating behaviors, and he says there's also an agreement about the cluster of symptoms in children. In other words, the typical behaviors of parental alienation. So that misstatement occurred in this journal, the Journal of Child Custody, and in which the actual original research was stated in reverse. So these are some examples. Sometimes a straw man is presented. That's where a false hypothesis or a false statement is presented and then objected to. For instance, in this case, this is in an article in a journal. If a child states that she does not want to see her father, this is explained. I just got a notice about my Zoom connection. I hope it doesn't go away. If a child states that she does not want to see her father, this is explained as fruit of the mother's manipulation. And the mother would be accused of being a manipulative mother. So first of all, that doesn't happen, that these statements are always explained as the fruit of the mother's manipulation. And then this statement is untrue. The hypothesis that the child is being physically or sexually abused is not contemplated. So this is a misstatement that did not occur in an article by an alienation critic. It actually occurred in a review article by a proponent of alienation, but the article had this mistake in it, that this particular sentence is a mistake. And in this case, we corrected it easily. I simply contacted the author, I contacted the editor, this was the name of the journal, and they corrected it. So sometimes it's easy to get misinformation corrected if everybody is cooperative. So this is one more example in a journal of the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but I just want to point out that usually these misstatements are simply isolated sentences or perhaps paragraphs, and the rest of the article is okay. This is an interesting article, and that the entire article was mistaken. The entire article was based on the idea that proponents of parental alienation think that every case of contact refusal is a result of alienating behaviors or brainwashing. And we do not say that at all. This is the name of the journal and the name of the article. And the author, whose name is Kimberly Joyce, who is located in Massachusetts, so nearby to where we are right now. So in this case, we tried strenuously to get the author and the editors and the publishers of this journal to correct this article, because the entire article was misguided, but they refused to do that. And finally, here's an example that is close to what you all are doing this weekend. This was a situation that occurred several years ago, and it involved a resolution that was being considered by the United States House of Representatives. And the proposed resolution had this false information that said, whereas scientifically unsound theories such as parental alienation syndrome, enmeshment, and others are frequently applied to reject parents and children's reports of abuse. Well, that's really incorrect to refer to parental alienation as an unsound theory. So we intervened with this. A colleague and I went to the United States Congress building. We met with the sponsor of the bill, and we wrote letters to the members of the committee. I think it was the Judiciary Committee, and we were successful in changing the bill that was being considered by the United States Congress. And the phrases that parental alienation and enmeshment were unscientific were removed from the resolution that was eventually passed. So that was that was a little tiny step that was successful with the Congress. I got to say, though, that in the larger battle, we're still behind, because I think it was the very same people who were promoting that resolution were the same people who, a couple of years later, promoted Cadence Law. So we stopped them in their initial attempt, but they learned something from that as to how to get things passed in Congress. So, and then here's one more thing that you probably heard about: misinformation published by the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. Well, what I want to do, though, I want to move on to a new type of research. This is research that my colleague here at Vanderbilt, Shenming Yu, and I have been doing, and it's a more scientific way to think about misinformation, especially recurrent misinformation. And we published this article, and the article that we did was actually on the cover of this journal called Behavioral Sciences and the Law. And see all those those blue circles and all those lines, that's our article. And we realize that that cover illustration is somewhat confusing. In fact, that's why we put it on the cover, because we wanted to have something on the cover that was confusing, that would hopefully invite people to read the actual article. So this was the name of the article. It starts with scholarly rumors, and it's an article about citation analysis. So I need to tell you, what is citation analysis? Because this is a whole higher level of scientific investigation of misinformation. Let me explain to you how this works. So in this particular case, we're not just talking about all these different types of false information. We're talking about repetition of the same misinformation over and over again. And the specific false information that we're talking about is this. Now, you need to pay attention to this, because you need to understand that this is incorrect. Parental alienation theory assumes that the favored parent has caused parental alienation in the child simply because the child refuses to have a relationship with the rejected parent without identifying or proving alienating behaviors. In other words, the critics of PA theory falsely say that what we say is that every time a child rejects a parent, it's because of alienating behaviors. We don't say that. That is a false statement regarding PA theory. What is actually true is that there are many possible reasons for a child to manifest contact refusal, or what's now called parent-child contact problem, and that parental alienation is only one of many possibilities. However, this false statement has been going on for at least 30 years, and that's what we've studied. And this is the article. This is actually a new article. The article I showed you has already been published, and this is a new article by Shenming and me that starts out misinformation echo chamber. And that's what I'm going to describe here. So in doing citation analysis, the first step is this. The first step is to identify all the articles that have that particular misinformation. And we were able to identify 110. This is an amazing amount of kind of obsessive compulsive research. We were able to identify 110 published journal articles or book chapters or presentations that have that same information that I was just reading to you. And these dots represent articles. Each dot is a different article that we have found. The size of the dot indicates the influence that that article had on subsequent publications. And the dots are arranged in chronological order, which I'm going to show you a close-up. But you can see right here that right here on the far left is Wood 1994, which is where this misinformation started. And then more recently goes up to the year 2022 over here. So that's the first step, to identify the articles. The second step is to identify the connections. We want to be able to show which articles quoted a previous article in this chronological display. And this is what we found. What you see here are a series of lines. These blue lines are actually, in a way, they're little tiny arrows. And each line shows that first article was quoted by subsequent articles. So the other thing you see here is in the beginning, there's only 2 or 3 articles that are stating this information. But as time goes on, there's this huge number. Over here on the right-hand side, there are enormous numbers, so that this problem of misinformation proliferates. It doesn't go away, it enlarges and proliferates. So I'm going to show you a close-up so you understand what's going on. So on the far left side is where this starts. In an article by a woman named Wood in 1994, she in fact was a law student, and this was an article in a law, in a journal, in a law school journal. And her article was quoted, it looks like if you count those number of blue lines, by about 10 people. And then those articles were quoted by other people and so on until we get up to the current time. This is at the far right-hand side. And you can see here, there are articles from 2022 and so on, and book chapters. So going back, see, when it's starting, there are only outgoing arrows because these articles are being quoted, and going to the current time, there are only incoming arrows because these articles are quoting previously published articles and chapters, but they haven't had time yet for them to be quoted by others. So this is a hardcore scientific approach at thinking about misinformation, and it's it's an unusual type of science. We didn't invent this. This is used in other scientific areas, particularly in hard sciences, in physics and chemistry and so on, to show how ideas propagate from a beginning idea to more as time goes on. But I want to show you the next step. This system here has 110 articles, and what we found was that they are not randomly distributed. That if you look at all the mental health and legal articles that are available, you get this 110 articles represented. But certain journals are present at a much higher degree. So that was the next step of our research, is to show that a certain journal accounts for half of these examples of misinformation. There are 110 altogether, and this one journal accounts for 60 of those articles. And this is what we found. This is the same, these are the same dots, except there are only 60 dots here. And then it shows how they're related, because one is quoted by others, and that's quoted by others, and so on, up to the present time. So that's really interesting. That's a discovery that has not yet been, and nobody has noticed that yet, and that has not yet been published. We've submitted this, and it's being peer-reviewed right now, and we hope that this will be published. So when I say it's promoted by the same journal, what do I mean? These 60 articles, 17 of them were published in that specific journal. 57 of them were written by members of the editorial board of the journal, and sometimes together by 2 or 3 members of the editorial board together. And so 60 of them had some connection to that journal. Well, I haven't actually told you the name of the journal, have I? But I'm going to do that right here in just a moment. This actually shows chronologically how this type of misinformation has grown tremendously from that first example in 1994 to the present time. And the red items are related to one specific journal, either in that journal or written by members of the editorial board, and then the blue are from other sources. So more than half of all these articles are connected to that journal. So what journal am I talking about? So I'm about to tell you that, but I want to explain first that the editors of that journal, we know, don't like the idea of parental alienation theory because they say so. They're the editors, and they publish articles in their own journal in which they strongly criticize PA theory. This is simply a statement by the 2 editors, Shaw and Geffner, of this journal. And for instance, they say 30 years after Gardner made up the label of PAS without any research support or operational definitions, then they say, well, that's false, that part of the sentence. But then they say, no known mechanisms exist explaining how such indoctrination of children who supposedly have a strong relationship with a parent leads a child to resist or refuse contact. They're suggesting that parents and other adults are not able to indoctrinate children to give up existing beliefs and adopt false beliefs. But I got to tell you that that's something that parents and grown-ups do every day. We indoctrinate children into our belief systems. And most of the time, they're correct belief systems. You know, that's how we teach reading. That's how we teach math, is we repeat certain things over and over again, and the child learns it. That's how religion is propagated, is certain belief systems are repeated over and over again. So it's ridiculous to say that there's no known mechanisms that explain how a parent can indoctrinate a child. So anyway, this is the reveal. This is the name. This is the journal. I actually mentioned this a few minutes ago, but it's the Journal of Child Custody. And They recently changed their name to the Journal of Family Trauma, Child Custody, and Child Development. So in this article that's under review, we name names. We name this journal, and we list and give 60 quotations of articles that were either published in this journal or were written by members of the editorial board of this journal. And they're all connected through this citation analysis that shows how they started and then they propagated and then they propagated. So it is interesting what the publisher says, which is a big publisher in the United Kingdom, Taylor and Francis. And I like what they say. They say the accuracy of the content of this journal should not be relied upon and should be independently verified with primary sources of information. Well, that's absolutely true. And in fact, that's what these articles don't do. These authors don't go back and check primary sources. They rely on each other, and they quote secondary and even tertiary sources that are erroneous to start out with, and then they repeat the error in some later publication. So that's exactly the error that their own authors create. So I wanted to give you that an example. This is kind of like cutting edge research in the field of misinformation. In other words, the earlier articles simply consisted of, we would quote misinformation, and then we would show that it was wrong, and then we would try to do something about it, like try to get it corrected or even removed from the literature. But this new research shows the flow of information over a period of time and how it's quoted from one article to another to another. So that's kind of the new way of thinking about misinformation. So what can we do about this? There's lots of things you can do. Make a formal complaint. So some of that, I mentioned we did that with that article, that book published by the American Psychological Association. We can publish a rebuttal. I showed you how we did that with the Journal of the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law. We can write a book. We can write a letter to the editor. We can make a video, which is what Larry DeMarco has helped us with. He's made videos that help us illustrate and counteract misinformation. We can create a campaign by having groups of people write letters, like we had a number of people write into the United Nations. And hopefully, please encourage everybody you know, don't believe everything you see. So here are a couple of books. This is the book that Demosthenes Lorandos and I published a few years ago. And one of the basic ways that this book is organized is around misinformation, that almost every chapter, at the end of the chapter, has examples of misinformation and how to correct it. And here's another book by Ashish Joshi, also has information and misinformation. There's a whole chapter on misinformation. So here's another idea. Obviously, there are people who don't agree with us on everything about parental alienation theory. Can we engage in legitimate discussion? I think we can. We're doing this in the context of AFCC. As you know, that's the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts. And we are searching for common ground. And in fact, AFCC has officially convened a committee of writers on parental alienation. And we have different perspectives, and we try to talk to each other. We try to explain clearly how we agree and disagree. And we perhaps design research to sort out the disagreements. And we hope to publish the results. And I'll give just an example. Here are two statements which I think that every PA advocate and every domestic violence advocate would agree to if they would only sit down and talk to each other. These are the statements. Domestic violence is a serious problem that affects many families, but sometimes there are false allegations of domestic violence. I think almost everybody in this field of family law would agree with that. And I think they would agree with this one, the same thing. Parental alienation is a serious problem that affects many families, but sometimes there are false allegations of parental alienation. So let's not argue about those two fundamental statements. Why don't we put our heads together and try to figure, well, how do you tell the difference? How do you tell the difference between legitimate allegations of domestic violence and false allegations? And how do you tell the difference between legitimate allegations of alienation and false allegations of alienation? That's what we should try to be working on. Well, anyway, this project organized by AFCC is called the Peace Talks. And we did a big presentation a couple of months ago in Boston at the big meeting of AFCC. And this was the actual event that Michael Saini was the moderator, and then several of us were involved. And you recognize the names. I think Peter Jaffe is there. Peter Jaffe is a longtime critic of alienation. And I'm there representing alienation, and we're trying to have conversations to see if we can listen to each other. So that's an example of officially talking among people that we don't always agree with. Incidentally, that might enter into your activities. For instance, there are members of AFCC who don't like Caden's Law. Now, there are people who are sometimes critics of alienation, but they don't like Caden's Law, and we don't like Caden's Law. So I think it's an opportunity for us to team up with other people. Sometimes we disagree with them, but we would probably agree on trying to do something about Caden's Law. So anyway, this happened back in June, but these peace talks have continued. And in the meeting, the AFCC meeting that's going to occur in Columbus, Ohio, next month, has another presentation. I'm not going to read all this, but it's another presentation. It's the same group of people, Peter Jaffe and me and the other people, who are continuing these presentations regarding peace talks. Here's a couple of examples. There's a critic of PA. I don't want to tell you who these people are right now, but a critic of PA and I are working together on an article about Richard Gardner and about misinformation that has been propagated about Richard Gardner for years. And another example, another PA critic and I also hoping to submit a presentation at the next AFCC meeting, the big one in New Orleans. So there are different efforts to have conversations between proponents of parental alienation and critics of parental alienation. Why are we going to this trouble? Some of this might have a bearing on the work that you're doing this weekend. Well, for one thing, if we sit down and have these conversations with people that we don't always agree with, it increases the number of individuals who understand PA theory. It also reduces misunderstandings and misinformation. It prompts us, if we have these conversations, it helps us to explain PA theory more clearly, because maybe that's why the misunderstanding occurred in the first place, because we were unclear in something we wrote or said. It helps us identify weak areas in PA theory which need more research. We may want to address parts of PA theory which are incorrect. I don't mean the big parts, but I think some of the nuances might need to be adjusted. And when we have these conversations, we make friends and meet interesting people. So what I've tried to do here is explain some examples of misinformation, some cutting edge research on how misinformation is propagated over a number of years through citation analysis, how these ideas fit into your activities for this weekend, because in order to promote legislation, you have to understand the basics of parental alienation theory, and you also have to know about all the misinformation that's floating around regarding PA theory. So I thank you very much for your attention. I think we're going to have a few minutes for questions and discussion. I know many of you belong to the Parental Alienation Study Group. If you want to, you can join PASG easily by go to the website, and there's a button there. There's a link that says membership. So let's see if we can have some discussion or some questions. And the first thing to do is to turn this off. And so here I am, and I see Larry has raised his hand. Larry, are you going to be kind of the moderator of the question and answers? Can you do that?
Sure. I think. Yes.
I see a number of things in the chat, but I haven't read them. Do you have a way to digest those things?
The person who is that you're calling a denier, all deniers aren't created equally. There's some people that deny all common sense, and there's some who are gray areas. Is the denier that you're working with someone that the people like Joan Myers and the diehard misinformation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I divide them into the hardcore critics and the softcore critics. The hard critics are people like Joan, like Naeem Assalam, the lady who wrote the thing for the United Nations, and some similar people. And I have not been able. I've attempted to have conversation with both those individuals, but I haven't been able to get past 2 or 3 email messages, and then it ends. So the people that I have the communication with and the dialogue, I guess I would call soft core critics. So they're people who agree that alienation happens, but they disagree with many of the specific aspects of alienation theory. I'll just give you an example, is what do you do about it? In cases of severe parental alienation, what do you do about it? Do you remember that do you remove the children from that household, or do you do something else? For instance, so the soft critics agree that alienation happens, but we need to discuss certain details. So they're the people I have the dialogue with.
You don't waste time with the hard critics, right?
Well, I've tried to, but I can't get past 2 email messages.
So I want to go to David here, and David, I'm going to whisper to Bill as you're talking because he's not going to be able to hear you. So don't be. He just wants to know if you can identify one of
those who oppose the concept of parental alienation.
Can you identify the motivators of those who deny parental alienation, the hard critics?
Sure. Well, the hard critics have been saying for years that they think that we misuse parental alienation in court to help child abusers, and specifically fathers, get found innocent and avoid responsibility. I mean, that's what they've been saying since the 1980s, that parental alienation is misused by abusive fathers to not take responsibility for abusing their children. And to put it simply, the father will say, well, the children don't want to see me, it's because of alienation. And the mother will say, the children don't want to see him because he abuses them. And that's the original fundamental driving force of the hard critics of alienation. And they've been saying that for 35 years. And it's very hard to get past that because it's kind of like a fixed belief system that they have. But I think that's the main thing. I'm sure there are other lesser motivating things, but I think that's the main one.
I will project so that he can hear me. Can you hear me? No. Okay. I'm looking at.
He's looking at
this
from a different perspective. 40% of fathers who don't see their children
1 year out of divorce.
1 year out of divorce.
Raises to 50% in 3 years.
Raises to 50% in 3 years.
Statistics often quoted.
These are the statistics often quoted.
While your work is heroic.
while your work is heroic,
How does that address the immediate crisis?
how does that address the immediate crisis?
That children are being deprived,
The children are being deprived,
both parents.
both parents.
Okay, thank you. So parental alienation is only one little piece of the whole family court situation. And I think that another issue that goes hand in hand is shared parenting. I think that we should all be promoting shared parenting because it just makes common sense that if from the beginning of a divorce, the parents are sharing the child 50-50, you know, a week here and a week there, or however it's done. If that's the way it's set up from the beginning, it's much more likely that 2 years or 3 years or 5 years down the road, the children are going to have a relationship with both parents. So I think that the whole PA thing is really just addressing a little piece of it. In fact, it's addressing what happens downstream, that after the children are separated from the father, and alienation is put into place, and all sorts of legal things have happened, and the dad has been cut out of the lives of these children. That's downstream, and that's where most of what we do is downstream, and we really need to go upstream and change the way family law is done. And shared parenting is a good thing to think about. Another thing to think about is how do you prevent, in other words, prevention of alienation in the first place upstream, you know, and that might have to do with educating, in addition to shared parenting, to educate divorcing parents and require mediation and arbitration rather than court hearings to figure out what the parenting time is going to be. So there's lots of things that need to be done upstream. And if all those things happen, we would go out of business downstream.
Bill, if I can, as a litigator, I also want to address this. When we walk into court, sometimes the judge says, don't mention that word, parental alienation. So what Bill is doing is on a macro level, he's instructing the judges top down, no, you have to let that in. The reason why you say that is because of misinformation. So he's addressing the core evil behind what we can't present in court as litigators. Yeah, you're up, Chuck, or so to speak. Go ahead.
What are the issues?
What are the issues? What are the hurdles with shared parenting?
Child support generates income for institutions.
The Title VII child support incentives that generate income, and the courts don't want to get rid of that. Chuck wants to know.
If we chase the money, who's benefiting from denying PA
Who benefits from denying PA
financially?
financially?
I think that the people who benefit, I don't know how to say this other than using the word extreme feminists, the people who mainly benefit from denying PA altogether are feminists who are insisting that women for thousands of years have been victimized by men and that everything needs to be done to help women overcome that inferiority that has been put upon them in everyday life and in court and in marriage and every other way. And they feel that, I mean, I don't know how to say it, that they feel that women have to be given every conceivable advantage to overcome her being victimized for thousands of years. And that includes anything that helps the mother have more custody of the children than the dads. And I believe, obviously, I'm stating a rather extreme view. I believe there are extreme feminists who believe that. And, you know, the extreme, that they say that the family, as we know it, should be dissolved. There shouldn't be family. There should simply be mothers and children. You know, the extreme view really wants to get rid of fathers. You know, how else can you say it?
It's not just child support incentives. Bar associations also oppose shared parenting because then it creates more litigation. I said Title V. There's a whole lot of different ones. Let's go to Lisa, and then we got John, if we have time. Go ahead, Lisa. Comment. because you can reach the masses, she's going to appeal to you. She contacted Joan Meyer, the speaker, and spoke to her, you said? Oh, good for you. To appeal to her sense of compassion as a woman. And she told her parental alienation is very real. And also was abused physically in the marriage. So she feels she's a bridge between the two communities. Joan said she's received a lot of phone calls from alienated mothers that they hear you, excuse me. Later, they came out with CAMS, child and mother sabotage, CAMS, which is PA for women only. She contacted her again and told her about her friend, a guy whose parents say that again, I'm sorry. The case, Rod McCall, his wife kidnapped the son when she killed. Sorry, that's what I didn't hear. Yeah, if you're going to keep going. I'm trying, hey.
Book is out on the table.
All right,
Right, okay,
go ahead.
right. So Rod McCall wrote, "For the love of Eric, once his son was murdered by Karen, his wife, he was given custody reversal after he proved that he did not sexually abuse Eric. Unfortunately, Karen killed Eric. So this does happen. It's non-gender biased, absolutely. And I tried to appeal to Joan Meyer's sense of compassion by explaining to her that even though child and mother sabotage would help my defense, I couldn't in good conscience appeal to the judge with child and mother sabotage because this happens to fathers as well. So anyways, I would say, because you speak to so many people, you could ask women that are alienated mothers to contact Joan Myers. I joined the NSPO and I sit quietly and listen to their presentations. I'm trying to earn the respect and trust of Danielle Pollock and Joan Myers so that I later on can speak for our group and hope to collaborate. But in the meantime, I think the more alienated mothers that contact this organization and try to appeal to Joan Meyer maybe would help. That's all.
Reply to your second conversation.
I called her on the phone and then she spoke to all of us in a group in a Zoom meeting through the NSPO. Saying we are hearing you, we've received your calls and we are doing something about it. And then they released CAMS, child and mother sabotage.
Do it, okay.
Yeah, I think it's great. Thank you very much.
Allison.
I think it's great that you've had these.
For Bill.
Yeah. I'm just commenting. I think it's great that you're having these conversations with Joan. And I know I've tried to a couple of times, and if you're able to, that's great. And hopefully they can continue and get more complicated.